Let's listen to The Adventure of the Blue Carbuncle by Arthur Conan Doyle, Level A2, Oxford Reading University.
The second morning after Christmas, I paid a visit to my friend Sherlock Holmes. I wanted to wish him happy holidays. He was sitting on the sofa when I entered. On the wooden chair next to him was an old torn hat. Next to it lay a magnifying glass. "Are you busy?" I asked. "I can visit another time." "No, not at all," he replied. "Actually, I made a discovery that I would like to discuss with a friend. It is a simple matter, but still a rather interesting one." "I suppose that this hat here is connected to some awful crime?" I asked. "Ah, it isn't a crime. It is more of a funny story," replied Holmes with a smile. "Do you know Peterson, who works at the hotel?" "Does the hat belong to him?" I guessed. "No, but he found it on his way home, after celebrating Christmas," said Holmes. Then he explained to me what happened. Peterson was walking down the road. He saw a man with a large white goose over his shoulder. On the corner of the street, the man got into an argument with several teenagers. One of them knocked his hat off. So, the man lifted his walking stick to protect himself and broke a shop window by accident. Peterson decided to help him. But when the man with the goose saw Peterson in his uniform, he got scared. He dropped the goose and ran away. So did the criminals. I suppose they all thought Peterson was a police officer. This way, Peterson was left with this hat and the bird. "What a story! Did he return the bird to the owner?" I asked. "It wasn't an easy task," replied Holmes. On the bird's leg was a card saying, "For Mrs. Henry Baker." As for the hat, it had the letters HB on the inside. These letters certainly stood for Henry Baker. But just imagine how many men named Henry Baker are in London. So, Peterson took the goose home. He decided to eat it himself. "Is there a possibility that you can identify the owner?" I asked. "I can guess certain things after examining the hat. But perhaps you want to try yourself first?" Holmes suggested. I took the hat and looked at it very carefully. It was a completely ordinary, round black hat. A very old and dirty one. I gave the object back to Holmes. "Nothing comes to my mind," I said honestly. "Well, I think many things are quite clear," replied Holmes. "For example, I can tell that it belongs to an intelligent man. He used to be rich 3 years ago, but now he earns a lot less than before. And his wife doesn't love him anymore." "You are certainly joking," I said, very surprised. "There is no way you can work that out just by looking at the hat." Holmes smiled. "Not at all," he answered. "Look, this hat is very large. So, if a man has such a huge head, he has a huge brain, too. There has to be something in it. Moreover, hats like this were in fashion 3 years ago. And the owner hasn't bought a new one since then. The hat is made of expensive material. So, this man used to have enough money to buy it back then. But he still wears the same hat, so he doesn't have much money now," Holmes explained. "I can understand all that," I said. "But what about his wife?" "This hat is torn and very dirty," Holmes continued. "A wife will not allow her husband to leave the house in a hat that looks this awful. If she cares about him." Holmes smiled. "Finally, the goose and the wife's name on it. I think Mr. Baker wanted to give the bird to her as a gift. He thought that maybe it could save the relationship." Suddenly, the door opened wide, and Peterson, the hotel worker, entered the room. He looked very surprised. "Sir, the bird," he said. "My wife found this in its stomach." On his hand lay a small blue stone the size of a bean. It was very bright. Holmes became very excited. "Peterson, you have found a very valuable jewel," he said. "This stone is—" "Is it the Countess of Morcar's Blue Carbuncle?" I cried out. "The one that was stolen from her at the Hotel Cosmopolitan?" "Of course, my friend," Holmes replied. "The police think that a hotel worker did it, but I am not that sure. Let's try to discover how the stone ended up in the bird's stomach." Holmes asked Peterson to put a notice in all evening newspapers. "If Mr. Henry Baker wants to get his hat and goose back, he should come to 221B Baker Street at 6:30 p.m. today," the notice read. We waited impatiently for the evening to come. Exactly at 6:30, a man arrived at our door. He introduced himself as Mr. Henry Baker. He was dressed in a thin coat, although it was cold outside. By the way he talked, I could tell that he was a well-educated man. So Holmes was right about him. Mr. Baker was happy to have his hat back. "Why didn't you publish an advertisement?" asked Holmes. "This way, you could find your lost things." "I was so sure that the criminals took away the hat and the goose," explained Mr. Baker, "so I didn't believe that I could get them back. And I don't have much money now anyway," he added. "Ah, I see," said Holmes. "Unfortunately, I can't give you back your bird, because we ate it. But we bought you a fresh one, and it is even larger." Henry Baker seemed happy with the new goose. Holmes asked him where the first bird was from. It turned out that it was a gift from someone named Windigate. After that, Mr. Baker said goodbye and left. Holmes closed the door after him and said, "This man has nothing to do with the crime. He didn't mind taking the new bird. This means that he didn't know anything about the carbuncle. He is not the thief." So we decided to talk to Mr. Windigate, the man that gave the goose to Mr. Baker. "I bought it from Mr. Breckenridge at a local market," Windigate told us. After that, we went to the market and found Mr. Breckenridge's shop. "Good evening," said Holmes. "Can we buy a goose?" "We have no more geese today," said Breckenridge, "but I can recommend a good shop." "But we wanted to buy your birds," replied Holmes. "Mr. Windigate said they were the best." "Ah, yes, Mr. Windigate. I sold him about 12 geese yesterday," answered Breckenridge. "They were excellent. Where did you get them?" asked Holmes. Suddenly, Breckenridge got very angry. "Why does everyone want to know where I got the geese from? Shouldn't worry you," he said. "They weren't the only geese in the world, were they? Now please, leave me alone." Holmes and I walked away and stood under a street lamp. Holmes was lost in thought. Suddenly, we heard someone shouting. The voices came from Mr. Breckenridge's shop. Breckenridge was talking to a small man standing at his door. "I have had enough of you and your geese," he shouted. "I bought them at a farm. Why are you worried about them if they weren't yours?" "One of them was mine," was the little man's response. He was almost crying. "I don't care. Get out," replied Breckenridge as he closed the door. "I think we are lucky today," said Holmes. "This is the man we are searching for." He told me to follow him. We came close to the small man, and Holmes touched him on the shoulder. The man turned around. He looked nervous. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am Sherlock Holmes. I know that you are looking for one of the geese Breckenridge bought for his shop. He then sold them to Mr. Windigate, who gave one to Henry Baker." "I don't know how you learned about this, but you are exactly the man I need. Can you help me find the bird?" asked the small man. "I think I can," said Holmes, "but I suppose we should go somewhere warm to discuss it." Holmes caught a taxi, and we drove to 221B Baker Street. The man's name was James Ryder, and he worked at the Hotel Cosmopolitan. He really wanted to know where his goose was. "Well," said Holmes, "the bird was here, in this room, and it laid a very strange egg." He opened a small box and took out the Blue Carbuncle. Ryder's face went white and had an expression of fear on it. Then he fell into the chair. "You can't hide anything from me, Ryder," said Holmes. "I know what happened. Now tell me, how did you learn about the stone?" And so Ryder told us his story. He learned about the carbuncle from the Countess of Morcar's servant. It looked like a good opportunity to get rich quickly, so the servant helped him to steal the stone. At first, Ryder didn't know where to hide the carbuncle, but then he got an idea. His sister had many geese, and she wanted to give him one for Christmas. Ryder made one of the geese swallow the stone. After that, he wanted to take that goose with him. However, the goose ran away and disappeared among other birds. Ryder's sister then gave him the wrong one. When he realized that the carbuncle was inside some other bird, it was too late. All the geese were already sold to Breckenridge. When Ryder finished, he was shaking and crying. Holmes looked at him, not saying anything. Then he opened the door and said, "Get out." "What? Sir, how can I?" began Ryder. "Get out," repeated Holmes. Ryder ran out of the room and disappeared into the night. Holmes sat down on the couch and took out his pipe. "This man won't steal anything ever again, I'm sure," he said. "He is way too scared. But if you send him to prison now, he will become a real criminal for life. Maybe I broke the law right now, but it is Christmas, the season to forgive and forget. So, Watson, shall we have dinner?"
Learning English is boring? Try learning with your favorite movie characters. English courses, interactive lessons with scenes from famous movies and TV series, best-selling books and word games, all in one place. EWA app. Try appewa.com. Now, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more free audiobooks like this. And now, let's listen to another English story.